In 2016, I found myself sitting on a tiny love seat center stage at the San Francisco Opera, the opera house Julia Roberts' character visits in the movie Pretty Woman. I was sitting in that love seat and contemplating the end of my career. I was in the Bay Area as an apprentice stage director for the Marilla Opera program, one of my industry's most prestigious summer programs where, every year, 20 or so young opera singers, 5 pianists, and a stage director are offered the opportunity to work with some illustrious figures in the opera industry and launch their careers. As the apprentice stage director, it was my job to direct the Marilla Grand Finale, a gala performance attended by influential industry figures, opera donors, journalists, and the public. It's hosted by San Francisco Opera, and based on how the singers do every year, 5 from the pool are offered fellowships with the company. This adds a certain level of prestige to the whole affair and means that a lot of hopes and dreams are riding on its success. The San Francisco Opera stage is 33 feet wide, which is big. And because the performance is a musical revue and not a proper opera itself, it doesn't really matter what the singers are performing on. It just matters that the stage looks full and the singers look elegant. So every year, the grand finale takes place on whatever set the San Francisco Opera happens to have on stage at the moment. I had been told that we would be performing on the set for a new opera that was going to have its world premiere a few weeks after the grand finale. It was a gorgeous and ornate set, and I remember thinking it already made the stage look so full that I didn't need to add much more. Consequently, the only additional things I asked for were a love seat and a couple side tables. But then San Francisco Opera thought about this some more and realized that because the set we were on was intended for a world premiere, they would be spoiling the surprise if they had us perform on it before the opening night of the show it was actually intended for. So, 24 hours before the grand finale, 24 hours before the entire industry was going to be introduced to my colleagues as performers and me as a director, I was brought onto stage and informed that the set had to be pulled. We would be performing on nothing but the furniture I had requested. I remember looking around the cavernous stage in despair. I imagined the moment on opening night when the audience would gasp in shock because instead of the beautiful set they expected, the curtain would rise to reveal nothing. And worst of all, I imagined how the singers, my friends, would feel when they found out that on what felt like the most important night of their careers, a key part of the game plan had suddenly gone missing. So, that's how I ended up sitting in a love seat on a completely empty 33-foot wide stage, staring out into an audience that was about to be filled with over 3,000 people, contemplating the end of my career. I may have been being a little bit melodramatic, but I also was definitely in a jam. What was I supposed to do? In my experience, it's not that the show must go on. It's that the show will go on, no matter what. Even if something goes wrong, even in the face of uncertainty, as long as there are people in seats, the curtain will rise and the show will happen. In my role as a producer and stage director, I've worked all across North America and met hundreds of artists. And every single person I know has multiple stories of a performance where something went terribly wrong and an entire cast needed to adapt on the fly. In fact, it's so common that if you've ever attended any sort of live performance, it's entirely likely that you sat in an audience blissfully unaware while something catastrophic was going wrong behind the scenes. So what do artists have that make them so good at rapidly pivoting in high-stakes situations? In 2018, the World Economic Forum stated that creativity is the single most important skill for business leaders to invest in, and advocated engaging directly with artists as a means of bringing that creativity into their organizations. They understand that for artists, creativity is a foundational skill that allows them to quickly devise and implement solutions to unforeseeable or complex problems. Now, before I jump into how we do this, I think it's worth clarifying some things about what creativity is and what it is not. Because for many people, it's one of those mercurial concepts that's understood intuitively, but is hard to put into words. The reason why is because when we look to artists to help us define it, we're often seeing creativity intersecting with another quality that's fundamental to art: expression. Expression is the ability to make one's thoughts and feelings known. Expressive people can make others feel and understand things, but one can express themselves in uncreative ways. Because an artist exists at the intersection of expression and creativity, we often conflate the two and assume that to be creative, we also need to have an excess of emotion, and that's just not the case. Creativity is a process that's all about finding new and imaginative solutions to a challenge. It's a process that calls on us to accept the limits of our own perspective and seek out ways to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the issue in front of us so we can find a new way to address it. What this means is that creativity requires us to challenge what we know and explore territory that might seem murky and ill-defined. The fact that it requires stepping off a known path and into a fog is precisely why it's difficult to do. The unknown is scary and can feel risky. We don't like to feel like we can't see what lies ahead or that we don't know where we're going. So what artists understand about creativity is that building a certain tolerance for discomfort is part of the process. This is why we have the stereotypical image of the troubled artist who locks themselves in a room to create their magnum opus. Though I'm happy to report that nowadays many artists find ways to balance this discomfort without letting it totally consume them. The world is facing an increasing number of concerns, both local and global, and people are being called upon to constantly readapt to a rapidly shifting social, political, and economic landscape. The rate of change can, at times, feel exponential and overwhelming. Discomfort is not going to be an optional experience for us moving forward. We've already sustained a high level of it this past year. And as these issues become more acute and the pressure to find out-of-the-box solutions is felt, it's becoming critical for individuals, communities, and corporations to develop the precise type of creativity that I've staked my career on. So how can we lean into the discomfort of creativity without risking harm? The way I see it, there are two paths one could take. First, you could focus on enhancing individual creativity. This would mean pushing individuals off the path they know and encouraging them to find their own way through the fog. In practical terms, this might look like asking people to develop entirely new skill sets or having them do a ton of research or empathy building exercises. Really anything that might help them develop more cognitive flexibility. We love this version of creativity in our culture. When people are particularly good at it, we have a name for them. We call them geniuses. The arts get many things right about creativity. This is one of the things I feel we get very wrong. We centralize the creativity process around individuals who seem to display the highest aptitude for innovation, and we give them a disproportionate amount of the credit for the output of many. We do this in all sectors. The world loves their Mozarts and their Beyoncés, and they also love their Steve Jobs, Elon Musks, and Warren Buffetts. But this is ultimately an inefficient method of enhancing creativity. The truth is, creativity is not just about having innovative ideas, but about how we put those ideas into action. Because of this, there will always be a ceiling for what an individual is capable of achieving on their own. And I mean truly on their own, without any assistance. But when we broaden our understanding of who is contributing creatively to our processes, creativity begins to stack. Each additional person who's able to provide a new perspective to a challenge will increase the overall creative capacity of the group. Which brings us to the second path. The other, more effective way to manage the discomfort of creativity is to create circumstances that allow people to stay on their paths where they're comfortable, but ask them to work collaboratively with others who are looking at the same problem from a different vantage point. This will still require people to experience some discomfort, but that comes in the form of fostering an openness to each other and our unique ideas. That discomfort is due less to assuming individual risk and more to the fact that you may have to trust someone, or perhaps multiple people, even if you don't entirely see things their way. Holding space for others to contribute their perspective to a collective understanding is the fastest way for groups of people to devise creative solutions to problems without asking each individual to step too far out of their skill set or comfort zone. This is not a new revelation on my part. Other sectors would call this diversifying a team. But I do think that artists have particularly incisive ways of activating diversity that are worth sharing. There's a lot of amazing material already out there about how to activate creativity. In fact, many have spoken about it on this very platform. But I want to specifically highlight 3 things performers do consistently that make them particularly good at creatively adapting to unforeseen circumstances. The first is reflective leadership. In my world, the opera world, we definitely have a fairly rigid hierarchy on paper. There's a conductor standing on a podium in an orchestra pit who is more or less in charge. And while that's somewhat true, it's also an oversimplification. The truth is, while roles are clearly defined in an orchestra or opera, not everyone can sing the same role or play the same instrument. Leadership is fluid and can be in multiple places at once. An opera singer explained it to me like this: sometimes it's more important to listen for a note from the horn section than it is to get a downbeat from the conductor. I like to call this reflective leadership because I imagine it like a hall of mirrors. There are distinct panes of glass facing each other, and leadership is bouncing rapidly between each one. The second thing artists do is continuous check-in. Performers don't just check in with each other at the beginning and end of a performance. They are in a constant state of looking for feedback from their collaborators. This helps them get a sense of where everyone is at and where they need to keep moving forward. Whether that comes in the form of eye contact, breathing together, or a physical gesture like nodding, performers who are constantly checking in are the ones you know will pivot rapidly because they have the most complete picture of what's going on. One pianist explained to me that he can tell if a singer will make it through a vocal phrase or not by how they breathe, literally what their intake of breath sounds like. And if he senses that a singer didn't get a good enough breath, he'll pick up the tempo a bit so that they can make it through the musical line without losing air. The third thing artists do is play. Every creative person has some element of play in their life. This is a practice of adopting a mindset of seemingly directionless exploration that may or may not be literally tied to a project they're working on. But play is important because it allows individuals to joyfully discover new ideas or solutions to problems in a low-stakes environment. It also helps them to practice spontaneity, so when the unforeseeable happens, moving intuitively or judiciously breaking from the pre-established plan doesn't feel dangerous or out of control. So, to recap, we're more creative when we draw on the experience and expertise of others. And in order to create spaces that allow people to bring their full creative selves to every process, artists practice continuous check-in, reflective leadership, and play well before the point where anything might go wrong. So, how did my story end back in 2016? How did I get myself out of that love seat on that 3-foot wide stage and face my new reality? I leveraged my team's creativity. Reflective leadership. The first thing I did was gather the stage manager and lighting designer together so that we could figure out how to make the stage look smaller. I suggested that we could have the depth of the stage by dropping a screen at center instead of using the curtains at the back of the stage that had originally been proposed to us. The lighting designer said that he could use lights to take care of the rest. Then the stage manager suggested that we push the love seat as close to the front of the stage as possible so that the singers would look closer to the audience and therefore larger. Continuous check-in. Later, when the conductor arrived and saw what was going on, he first asked, "How is this going to affect the singers?" I assured him I would tell the singers to do whatever needed to be done to check in with him as often as they needed to. And he responded with, "Great, and I'll catch them if I need to." And finally, play. I reminded myself that the Marilla Opera program is one of my industry's most prestigious summer training programs for a reason, and therefore attracts some of the top talent. Every single one of the singers were highly skilled, and I had watched them play with each other throughout the summer. They had done escape rooms together, they had gone on walks together, they had gone into practice rooms and had sung through pieces that had nothing to do with anything they were working on. I knew that they were comfortable with spontaneity. Sure enough, when the singers showed up for their final dress rehearsal and saw the unexpectedly empty stage, after only a moment of fear, I saw each and every one of them find their scene partners. Even before I had said anything, they were already discussing ways to make this new scenario work. I called the group together and assured them that the good news was that we didn't need to come up with a whole new plan. We just needed to fit the old plan into new circumstances. The bad news was that due to the amount of time we had left together before the performance, less than 24 hours at this point, we did not have enough time to talk out the details as a group. I needed to prioritize looking at the things that needed attention due to safety concerns, and the rest of them, I needed them to negotiate amongst themselves. I needed them to play. I put my trust in my team and asked them to draw upon the creativity they already possessed. You might be wondering how that performance went. Well, this is what the San Francisco Chronicle had to say about it the next day. Quote, "Over the decades, I've never seen the job of the Marilla Grand Finale dispatched with the elegance, verve, and sheer theatrical imagination that Aria Umezawa brought to it on Saturday night." It may have been my name in that review, but when I watched that performance with the rest of the audience, what I saw was pure creativity. When the unforeseeable happens, the surest way to find your footing again is to activate those around you. That night, I saw a group of people seamlessly adapting to a new and unforeseeable challenge because they had no other option, and also because they'd been given the trust and permission to do so. Diversity is not just a moral imperative, but the fastest way to unlock creativity. If leaders of all stripes encourage an openness to vastly different experiences and trust the knowledge others' perspectives bring to the table, humanity's creativity will compound. When that happens, we'll discover solutions to seemingly insurmountable challenges. And if we adopt this mindset, then perhaps we can also spend the rest of our lives drawing strength, not anxiety, from the knowledge that the show will always go on.